basically meeting that we've called to talk about our different types of training that we need. Everyone needs, especially all the new ones, and even some of us old ones. Okay? Okay, I didn't bring my agenda in here. Okay. This meeting will be open to the public. However, meetings are also available to watch on our YouTube channel. Please mute your phones and computers. Right now, as I said, this is greetings. I welcome everybody that's here. We were supposed to have some speakers tonight, but they haven't showed yet to come in and talk, but they may show up between now and then. If everybody would please stand for our prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for today and every day that you have given us and for the days to come. We thank you, Lord, for our first responders, our police department, our volunteer fire department, the water department, our city employees, and our city administrator, and for all the council members, Lord. Just be with them as we make decisions and try to take care of our city to the best of our ability. We do know, Lord, that we do make mistakes, but we are willing to admit it when we do, and that just makes us a better person. Lord God, thank you again for everything that you do. I ask for all these things in the precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. You may have a seat, please. Okay. Roll call. To my right, I have Councilman Griffin, Councilman Prater, and Councilman Bass. And to my left, I have Councilman Wiggins and Councilman McGruer, and our city administrator, Keith Manton. And then, of course, y'all know who I am. In the back, we have Chief Dorsey. Our chief of police is here. We have Esther Marino. She is our financial and everything else, court, you name it. Then we have Pam Combs. She is our secretary / everything else. And then we have Mrs. McGruer in the back, and Danielle, and she is our new court clerk, and she's been here with us for a few months now and doing a great job. And then we have a guest. So at this time, as I said, citizens, the council welcomes public comments at this point on items not specifically listed on the agenda. Speakers must sign up before the meeting begins. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. The council cannot respond to matters not listed on the agenda until a future meeting. So we have nobody has signed up. They didn't show up. So, all right. Number 3, it's the city council and staff training with Brad Bullock. Mr. Brad? Thank you.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I can say that now. Y'all might not say that by the time we're done. I am legally obligated to talk to you for 2 hours. Now, technically, you're not legally obligated to keep your eyes open during that whole 2 hours, nor are you technically prohibited from snoring. So I'm just putting that out there right now. If you don't like it, talk to Ken Paxton. It's not my deal. No, we're here tonight for open government training. Elected officials are required to undergo that training, and state law requires 2 hours of that training each year, and that's what we're going to do tonight. Now, what we did was we prepared a presentation for you that had to be approved by the Attorney General to make sure that it goes over all of the required subjects And so now, in all seriousness, what I will do is we're going to go through these slides, and if at any point anybody has any questions or you want to bring up anything, related to open government, open meetings, public records, anything like that, any questions y'all have, just let me know. I'm happy to talk about it. And what I'll also do periodically as we go along is I will talk about some of my experiences over the years with open government litigation. I've been involved in a lot of cases involving open meetings, the Public Information Act, and so I might talk to you all about some of that, because the whole point of this is to keep you all out of trouble. As you know, the Texas Public Information Act and the Open Meetings Act do have individual criminal penalties for violations. And so if there is, if it's determined either by the Attorney General's office or by your local DA that government officials are acting in violation of usually the Open Meetings Act, but it could be the TPIA, Public Information Act, there theoretically could be criminal charges. So I would definitely want to try and keep you all out of jail as best I can. And so that's kind of the idea here. Is there a clicker, or who's clicking? Okay, all right.
Do you need a pointer?
You are my human clicker. All right, so let's go to the next slide.
Do you need a pointer?
Oh, sure, that might be helpful.
It's the top button. I stole it from the engineer, so you're welcome to use it. Will that get me in trouble?
Not under the Texas
okay,
Public Information Act. You're fine. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about your city and kind of what sets you apart from home rule cities. And it's important to know the difference between general law cities and home rule cities, because there are important differences. In fact, I spent a good portion of my day today writing a brief about what some of those differences are for some litigation I've got. Now, you are a type A general law city, okay? You do not have a home rule charter. You can't become home rule. You'd have to vote on that, and you have to have at least a 5,000 population, so you're not quite there yet. The power to adopt a charter, all of that's set out in the statutes. You're probably not going to be there for a while. So what this means is that you have the mayor and the 5 aldermen, and there are rules regarding what happens when there's a vacancy, and then Chapter 551. Oops, that's all right. All right, we're done. That's it.
Okay, it's over.
That was quick. That 2 hours flew by. So Chapter 551 and Chapters 552, respectively, of the Government Code deal with the Open Meetings Act and the Texas Public Information Act. Let's see, this is awfully tiny. Okay, there we go.
Okay, good.
So what we have here is the quorum for a meeting. Now, obviously, in order, the cities operate in one way and one way only, and that is in a properly called open meeting. Anything you act on has to be properly noticed on your agenda, and you have to have a quorum, and it has to pass by majority vote. So there may come a time when you want to talk about something at a meeting, and it's an important topic, I get it, but no matter how important that topic is, as a general rule, unless it is properly noticed on your agenda, you, the council, can't generally talk about it. Now, there is an exception for with the opening of a meeting, where just like with public comments, council members can make kind of their own kind of public comment where you can ask for something to be put on a future agenda. But the whole council couldn't get involved in like a policy discussion about something that's not on an agenda, okay? And that's basic open meetings law, and that's something we have to be very careful about. And so there may come a time when I'm sitting here, and I've been to a lot of meetings, and there may come a time when conversations kind of take a left turn or something like that, and you start talking about something that's kind of related to something that's on the agenda. I might have to pop up and say, hey folks, I'm gonna have to advise you to probably stop talking about that because it's not really noticed for tonight, okay? And that's just to keep everyone out of trouble and keep us on track for the Open Meetings Act. Now, just one more thing to remember, special meetings, if you're gonna act, or the meeting for imposition of taxes requires the supermajority of 4, okay? And so, yes ma'am.
What causes a quorum, inside or outside a meeting?
You have to be gathered in the meeting, and it has to be called to order, 3 people. So if one person leaves, and they're outside the building, you had 3, right? The third person's just right outside the building. Then technically speaking, you've lost your quorum and you need to at least pause until they come back.
Okay. If somebody comes in and say, we're just here gathering, and a councilman comes in, and then they're just wanting to visit or look or research some stuff, and then 2 more councilmen comes in, do we have a quorum if I'm in the building?
So if you have 3 council members who show up at City Hall one day, all at the same time, and it's not for the purpose of, like, say, a Christmas luncheon, okay, or
right,
Thanksgiving, or whatever, but you're here and you're discussing public business, my recommendation, one of y'all better hit the door.
Okay.
Okay?
I want to make sure.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Yes, sir.
But the mayor does not count as a quorum.
As a quorum.
That's correct.
Yeah.
it's 3 council members,
Yeah.
because the only time you vote, Mayor, is in the event of a tie.
The tie, yes, sir.
Right. So 3 council members shouldn't, and that's not just City Hall.
We just had a chili fundraiser,
Mhm.
and say 3 of us showed up there.
Now, that goes back to the social gatherings. So like if it's, a chili cook-off, or it's the public festival, right? That, you have a parade, or, whatever, Christmas parade, or, whatever the case may be, Christmas luncheon. If they are social gatherings and you're not talking public business, you can all get together.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have an agenda, and you don't have to notice it. But I will urge you, it's easy to slip into this. Hey, how about that thing that's coming up on the agenda next week? Don't do it, okay? Because someone's going to overhear you, and someone's going to accuse you of conspiring to violate the Open Meetings Act, okay? So just be very careful. All right, keep it social. You can talk about grandkids and the weather and all that kind of good stuff, but don't let that talk about the weather get turn into, since the freeze, those pipes we need to replace on 4th Street. Don't do that, right? Yes, sir.
Now, the same thing could go if 3 of us come up here, it's not a social gathering. For example, if 3 of us just for some unknown reason happen to show up here at City Hall.
Yes, sir.
But we're not talking about any city business.
Right. Yeah, as long as you're not discussing public business, right? But I will tell you that even if you're not talking public business, if you have, for example, and I've seen it before, I'm not criticizing, but if you have the community watchdog that knows your cars, and they say, oh, wait a second, those 3 cars are here now. Just be aware, that you have to be wary of just appearances of violations as well. Okay? So just something to think about. Okay. But yes, if you're not discussing public business, then you, again, it can be an impromptu social gathering. I mean, it could be,
most of the time when they come up here, they're in different areas. They're researching, talking this when they're talking over,
right,
but not talking the same thing.
I think that would be my question is if you have one council member come up here and they're signing checks, okay? And then there's 2 councilmen that are discussing drawings or something like this.
right.
That really isn't a violation of the Public Open Meetings Act.
I think that's my opinion. I think it is not a violation. However, you still have to be wary of that appearance that I talked about.
See it.
For the appearance of impropriety.
You do have to be wary of the appearance of impropriety, and you have to be sure. Now, there's this concept called, it's got 2 names. It's called a walking quorum or a rolling quorum. And that's where you may not even be gathered in the same place, right? But if you pick up the phone to call this one about public business, and this one picks up the phone to call this one about public business, and it's the same public business, that can be a violation of the Open Meetings
Okay.
Act. If you are, because the way that the Attorney General describes it is as if you are attempting to get around the quorum requirement.
Right.
So if you, one to the other, hey, but all three of us never met at the same time. Well, I'm telling you, especially if you're doing something like that by email, don't do it. Because that's, don't do it at all, but especially don't do it in writing.
Right.
Because that's real easy proof of an open meetings violation. That's why if you get an email from me, or Kent might send out an email to everyone, he's going to have on there, do not hit reply all, because that could be a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
Right.
When you get some email from me, I'm going to send out there's going to be a little thing, public officials do not hit reply all, because a reply all could be construed as a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Let's see. Okay. Next. Okay. So, notice requirements, conduct of meetings, executive session, teleconferencing, and penalties. These are all really important topics. Like we just talked about the applicability. Okay. The applicability of the Open Meetings Act, if it can apply if you're discussing public business and you've got a quorum, it applies. Okay. You have to have noticed it. For example, I can't tell you how many court hearings I've been to. And I've got the counsel who wants to come and witness that court hearing. But it's about public business, and they all want to come. And so if that's going to happen, we've had to post notices of a potential quorum for everyone to show up at the courthouse. Because they want to come watch what's happening, right? So, those are even if you're going to the courthouse to watch me argue about a case where you've been sued, if you're all going to be there to watch, I've got to post that, or Kent's got to post that as a potential open meeting. Okay?
Yeah.
So it applies. If it's public business, it applies.
It applies.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Now, could you go back? It's all right. So the notice requirements. Remember, agendas have to be posted 72 hours in advance at City Hall. If you have you all have that the board up front, right? And you post it also on your website. Okay. The conduct of meetings, we talked about that a little bit, Mayor. The question of someone comes in and out and they leave, and if you have a quorum, just a bare quorum at a regular meeting, and somebody steps out, technically you got to pause that meeting. And that's the other thing, is if it's a special meeting like this, now there's not going to be any action tonight. But if there were action, if you were contemplating any action tonight, or even discussion, as soon as you have that 4, and it pops down to 3, well then now you no longer have a quorum for special meetings.
Right.
So you have to remember, you got to think about what kind of meeting you're in.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
ma'am.
So special meeting is 4,
Yes, ma'am.
and you can have a regular meeting with just 3,
Correct.
because I'm the tiebreaker.
Yes.
And then if finances, now that's, if it's finances time, don't we have to have at least 4 for finances?
Only for the passage of taxes. Only if
Taxes.
it's for the
taxes.
So approving a budget can be a regular quorum.
Okay.
But if you're going to impose a tax,
Okay.
4.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Don't you also have to have a 4 for rezoning?
As if the city council were acting as board of adjustment.
Oh, it's a
right?
board of
I
adjustment.
think it's,
Yeah.
I think
that's, 75% or something.
I think so. Yes, sir. Yeah. When you're acting as the BOA, when you're wearing that BOA hat, and you are going to override a recommendation of your P&Z.
Okay.
So there are these other little times when you have to be cognizant of that, and that's one of them.
Okay.
Now that the governor has removed all of the waivers that you had there for, during COVID, and you could have people, everybody could teleconference, and everyone could, you could all be at your home and you could be participating in the meeting. Now that those waivers have gone away, so you can't do that anymore. In order to have a meeting, you have to have a quorum of human beings in the same room. But then if 2 of you or 1 of you, as long as you get that quorum, that 3-person quorum in physical attendance together at a properly noticed meeting, then 1 or 2 could appear by video conference if everyone in this room, right, can see and hear you, and you can see and hear the whole council. So it's got to be proper video conferencing capabilities. It can't be just on the phone. You got to see and hear, okay? So those are, and if you have, now, if you meet that qualification, the criteria, you can vote, and your vote counts, right? But if your internet goes bad, and we can't see you, or your video stops, or whatever, you may not be able to, right? So it becomes you have to be sure that you've got the audio video capabilities and that you can demonstrate that if you're going to, particularly if you're going to vote. Okay. If you're remote. All right. Now, penalties and remedies. The penalties, like I said, there are personal criminal penalties for intentional violations of the act. And those are all set forth, and we'll get to the slide in a minute. But not more important, because nobody wants to go to jail. But unless you are intending to violate the Open Meetings Act, you're not going to get charged. In all likelihood, you're not going to get charged with a violation of the Open Meetings Act unless you're engaged in some pretty egregious conduct. That's been my experience over the years. Okay, but even if it's an unintentional violation of the act, and nobody intended, nobody meant it, it was an accident, something happened. Well, some of the other remedies are that if action the city takes, if you take action in an improperly called meeting, then the action you take that night can be voided. And that can be devastating. If you haven't posted your agenda properly for when you want to adopt a budget, or any number of things, right? Like there are things that you have to act on tonight. There's a deadline, whatever, right? So those can be voided, and they can be voided by any member of the public, whether they're a citizen of Bruceville-Eddy or not. It can just be anyone. So that's another thing important to remember. Okay, next slide. We talked about this. It applies, almost all the time. There are very rare, if there's a quorum of you guys and you're talking public business, it applies. Okay, next slide. So what is a governmental body? It's you, and it's a whole bunch of other types of entities, okay, that are governmental bodies. So for sure, it's cities, but when you're acting as a P&Z or a BOA, you're still a governmental body. If you guys ever adopt some other boards and commissions, like for example, you adopt an economic development corporation, okay? They have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. So certain nonprofits and HOAs have to comply with the Open Meetings Act. And the reason it's so expansive is because Texas, like most states, has a policy of open government. The idea is so that the citizens can see what happens. And that's the goal of the Open Meetings Act. Next slide. We talked about quorum. And so it is, the majority of the governmental body unless defined differently. So we talked about some of the instances in which that simple majority gets defined differently. Special meetings, the zoning issue on a BOA are the 2 big ones. Next slide. What is the definition of a meeting? Now, this is important because it gets a little technical, but remember, it is a gathering of a quorum, okay, of this governmental body, and there is deliberation, that's a technical word, about public business or formal action taken. So, the courts have defined the word deliberation. You're any kind of communication about public business, which is real broad, that constitutes, if there's a quorum of you gathered together, that's a meeting under the Open Meetings Act. That's why I'm saying, back to your questions about, okay, but there's one of us over here doing this and two of us over here doing something else totally. Okay, you're not communicating with each other. The three of you are not deliberating about public business. I get it. But be very, very careful, because two of you can be over here doing something else, and one of you walks into the room and you overhear what they're talking about, and you go, oh, hey, how about...
Then you got social media people.
So that is where, even though you're separate and even though you're not, talking amongst yourselves, it's just very easy for that accidental kind of migration or cross-pollination to come into play. So just be very careful for your own, for your own sakes, okay?
Thank you.
And then, that's okay. So just, and again, the whole point of these public meetings is so that the public can witness your deliberations in the open about decisions you're going to make. That's it. Okay, next slide. So we've talked about these exceptions. So all of you can get together: social functions, conventions or workshops, ceremonial events, press conferences. Okay? So, ceremonial event. Usually when cities give out, their awards, or they make a resolution for something, it's usually as part of a meeting, right? And there's a photo op and people come and they make their statement and everything like that, and it's on the agenda. But there could be a time when, like, for example, the best example is the ribbon cutting of a new business. A new business comes to town, everybody wants to be there, it's a big deal for your city, and you're there with the big scissors and the big ribbon. As long as it is, and you're giving them the golden shovel, right? As long as it's ceremonial, social, and you don't get into, I wouldn't recommend talking about, hey, let's talk about the platting issues, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't get deep into it. You need to be sure you keep it ceremonial and social, and you're okay. All right? Same thing with press conferences. I mean, unfortunately, nowadays, when you see impromptu press conferences with cities, it's usually because something terrible has happened, right? And the council and everyone wants to turn out because, it's something that has affected your whole community. So in that instance, again, you can gather for a press conference to address this issue, but you wouldn't want to I wouldn't recommend. I certainly wouldn't recommend going beyond the scope of what you're gathered there about. If it's some tragic thing that's happened, right, and you can all use your imaginations. Everybody makes a comment, condolences, whatever would be appropriate in those circumstances. But if it's also, and now we're going to talk about a new policy that I want to adopt for this department, I wouldn't go that far, okay? I would keep it away from distinct policy discussions when you're all there at an impromptu press conference.
Less said, better off.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So, no formal action, and any discussion of public business is incidental to the authorized event. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, you can go and congratulate the new business owner. This is going to be great. This is going to be great for our tax base. That's public business, but that's okay. But if you start talking about, well, and now I think our tax rate should be, that probably goes too far. Okay? All right, next slide. So what has to be on your agenda? This is where your staff and everybody works together to make sure that it's got on it what you want. and that it's posted in accordance with the law. And so you have to, and mistakes happen, right? And I'll tell you about a one that just happened to us. Date, hour, place, subjects to be considered at the meeting, okay? And when they say hour, so we had a special meeting for a city of ours where a quorum of the council wanted to come talk to us about hiring us as their city attorney. And they were going to come to our office. It was just convenient for them to do it that way, but it was going to be posted as an open meeting. Well, it so happened that, you know, the night before, the mayor tests positive for COVID. He calls us up. He's like, "Hey guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cancel. I'm not going to make it. I'm sick," and the other council member wasn't going to come. Okay, no problem. That's fine. And then we had posted that notice at our office on the front door, because that's where it was going to be. And we did, we didn't, because we weren't their city attorney, we hadn't prepared their agenda notice. And their agenda notice neglected to say that the meeting was going to start at 1 p.m. Didn't say anything. It just said, on this day at my office. We were like, oops. Well, this is why you need a city attorney, because you couldn't have that meeting. So a simple clerical error could mean that you can't have a meeting, And so that's why, it's important to have more than one set of eyeballs on that agenda before it gets posted. So you don't, because what do? We use these forms. We use them as templates. And you cut and paste, and you put new stuff in, and you take out the date, and you put in the new time. And sometimes you just, you leave a blank, and it's an oversight, and it happens. But we want to limit those as much as possible. And then the subject to be considered. Now, I'm going to talk to you about this a little bit from personal experience, because this is where there can be a lot of political considerations, but also legal considerations. There may come a time when you have a hot potato topic, right? And you want to talk about it, but you don't want to set off all the alarm bells, right? And so we're going to talk about it. We want to talk about it maybe in closed session. And if it fits, even if it fits under one of the exemptions, one of the exceptions, and you can properly talk about it in a closed meeting, which we'll get, you know what that is, but we'll get to that in a minute. You have to provide the public with adequate notice of the topics that you're going to be talking about. And the law gets very specific depending upon what that topic is, who it's about. So back in the old days, the way a lot of cities used to do business, their agendas, old business, new business. Well, that doesn't really tell anybody anything, and that was on purpose. So old business, new business is no good. It violates the Open Meetings Act. You can't do it. But if you have a very hot button topic, let's say your city attorney gets caught in some really bad situation, and you want to bring that guy up here and you want to talk to them in closed session under the personnel exception. You're like, what the heck were you doing? Well, if it's a matter of public interest and you just say personnel, that probably isn't enough. If it is a matter of high public interest, you probably need to say to discuss employment, employment, performance, so forth of your city attorney. Now, you don't have to worry about me, I'm a good guy. But my point, though, is that when you have those kinds of issues, you can only go so far to kind of keep it under the radar. But because at some point you have to provide the public notice, and what cases say is that the more important an issue is to the public, the more notice you must provide. Okay? And I've had a lot of litigation about that very issue. You also, finally, discussion and possible action. Those are important words. If you plan to take a vote on something and you only tell the public discussion, but you then vote on it when your agenda only says discussion, that's probably a violation of the Open Meetings Act because you didn't tell the public that action was possible. So if there's any chance you're going to take a vote on something, you need to call it discussion and possible action. Okay?
We do that.
All right, next slide. So, regular agendas, well, it's regular or special meetings, 72 hours. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
I
all
got a
right.
lot of questions, I'm
Sure.
sorry. Okay, on doing the agenda, say somebody wants to put something on the agenda, a citizen calls and says, I want this put on the agenda, and I want it stated this way, and if he said a bad word or something like that, or she said a bad word, can we adjust it, or do we put it that way without telling them, or do we have to contact them and say, hey, can I reword this?
You don't have to ask them,
You don't have to ask, you can reword anything that they
as
put on
long as
the
it puts
agenda.
as long as it puts here's what the courts say, okay? It doesn't need, the notice needs to be sufficient for kind of like the average member of the public,
Okay,
okay? It doesn't have to put the person who came to you. I'm complaining about my neighbor who lives at 123 Jones Street. And I want you to tell Mr. Smith you just can say, you don't have to get that specific necessarily. It just if it just deals with Jones Street, issue relating to Jones Street, okay? That might be enough. But you're not obligated to follow the direction of a member of the public who comes in and tells you what this agenda item needs to say.
what if I wanna put something on there and they go, well, I don't know, that we might ought to reword that.
Who's they?
We'll say Kent, he's the one that takes care of it. Because
You,
I don't pronounce things properly and I don't spell real well.
well, if the way that you want to put it on the agenda puts the public on notice, then that's fine. However, if it's an important issue, then that's probably something where Kent's going to email me or pick up the phone and say, hey, how do we need to word
Okay.
this?
Okay.
Because that's my job, is to make sure that it's adequately, and there have been times over the years when I have gotten emails or calls, or I've gotten, here's the agenda, right? And I look at these items and I go, because I don't live in all the cities I represent, so I don't know necessarily everything that's going on. And I look at this agenda item and I don't have any idea what this is talking about. And so I'll call up the city secretary or the city manager or city administrator and go, what's this about? And they'll say, oh, well, there's this big issue about blah, blah, blah. And I'll go, okay, well, you need to say X, Y, Z,
Okay.
right? And it's just a group effort to make sure that there's at least the minimum amount of notice so that you're not in trouble. I've got one, thank you. And that's what you got to do. You got to provide at least that minimum amount of notice that's required by law.
Okay,
Okay?
so you're okay, you can correct me anytime.
Yeah. And if there's ever an emergency meeting, a need for an emergency meeting, okay, which, look, 2 years ago with the snowpocalypse, right? And then 2 weeks ago with the ice. Obviously travel was difficult, but there could have been a need for y'all to meet to declare some kind of an emergency or, whatever. It just,
Shut
there could be something, necessary. So you've got to, in that case, ideally, you'd give me a call, right? Because this gets kind of technical.
Okay.
But if you can't, it sets forth that 1 hour notice. You have to notice, is it an emergency? You put it up there.
Alright. So when I shut, like on the ice thing, and I close the city hall for 2 days and
Mhm.
come in late on the third day, do we let you know that we done this? Or
If,
that I done this, or?
you certainly may,
Okay,
but
it's
if-
not necessary,
it's
but-
not, but for something like that, for something administrative like that, it's not necessary.
Oh, okay,
Now, if an emergency require, again, this is when the council has to come together and meet to take action.
Oh, okay.
Like,
Totally different thing.
right,
Okay.
like you have to make some kind of emergency appropriation or purchase or
Right,
something, you
okay.
know,
Thank you.
for whatever reason, right? It's rare, that doesn't happen often, but it can. And so in that particular case, you'd want to say, here's the nature of the emergency. And there's a whole bunch of case law that describes what's an emergency. And it's not an emergency. I mean, again, what is your intent? Is your intent to get around that 72 hours? Or is your intent because there's a true emergency?
Okay,
Okay? Yes, sir.
thank
Does
you.
it just take 3 for an emergency meeting?
Yes, sir. Regular quorum.
All right.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one thing on that emergency, for example, if we lose, let's say, all of a sudden we lose a couple of water wells.
Mhm.
Now, we're not gonna be able to get water out properly. Now, would that, could be considered an emergency, so we're gonna have an hour notice and we're gonna post agenda for an hour and, have a meeting about fixing these, repairing these 2 water wells down that provides,
It-
water to the citizens.
It could. It could. I mean,
Safe drinking water.
right.
you know.
It certainly could. I don't want to give you a blanket yes, you know, because like all lawyers, our first answer is always it depends. And that's and we don't say that to you know to kind of cover our backsides.
Right.
That's not. But the one small fact, you change that one small fact, and my answer that was yes is now no. And so it just depends on all of the facts of a particular situation.
Right, maybe waiting 72 hours is not gonna be good
Cor-
enough.
correct.
Or
If there's a-
so if that's the case,
Yeah.
then to me, it is a true emergency.
It could be. If there's a public calamity, and that's, you know, and that's, again, acts of God, weather events, health events, you know, there's a massive wreck on I-35 that causes an explosion and the bridge to fall down, or, whatever, right? There's a whole bunch of examples of what constitutes an emergency, and there are also cases where cities have declared emergencies, and they're not emergencies, and they've gotten in trouble. So that's where, you know, is it a true public calamity? Is it a public health and safety issue? Is it truly, do you have to act within the next, 24 hours? You know?
Essentially what, kind of helping define some of that is if you had in your water situation where we lost 2 wells,
Yes.
we can't provide water for the city. If we can't provide water for the city, we're gonna have to come together and have potable water brought in with trucks and things like this, so people can come to us and get water from a potable water truck. We need to be able to come together to vote to expend those funds and
Yes,
things
sir.
like that. That would
Yes, sir.
constitute an emergency.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and you can't make people wait for 72 hours
No.
to get water, right? Like if you can, and it's a true emergency,
Yeah.
right? But you can't call it and I'm thinking of some cases where what they wanted to do was, get a new garbage hauler contract, and they declared it an emergency because the other garbage hauler couldn't make it to the meeting. But if we call an emergency meeting, this other guy's right here. Right? Like that wasn't, that court struck that down. Yes.
Mr. Bass has a question.
In case of an emergency, and say 3 of the council members were on a cruise or somewhere out of town, depending, I guess, on what the emergency was, would the mayor have the authority to
And the city
take some kind of
administrator.
action, or does it stop at $2,000?
So,
Say if 2 pumps went out and Gene said it's gonna cost $38,000 to fix it.
yeah. So in that kind of an instance where there's a true emergency but council members can't gather in a quorum because of whatever, you're out of town, weather, whatever the case may be.
Would it be all right for the mayor to call those people if she could, or whatever, and tell them what's happened? Would it be all right with them to do it? If They said yes.
What would be okay,
You're talking about a pole vote.
yeah, so what I would not call a quorum on the
Right.
phone,
Yeah.
right? I wouldn't do that. What I would do in that event is, for example, and this has happened in the past, where the mayor and the city administrator have conferred that for whatever reason there was unable to gather a quorum, and they have made a public calamity emergency expenditure, and then at the next meeting, they've asked the council to come and ratify that.
Mhm.
Okay,
That's the way that you
Okay.
do something like that,
all right,
okay?
do it on the next meeting, okay.
Yeah, I would
ahead and take
do
care
that as a ratification.
A
If it's an
ratification.
emergency, it's an emergency, and you have to do it because, you know, if you don't do it, there's gonna be some public
It's
calamity.
not real likely that that could happen,
It's,
because if pumps went out, you know, we do get water from Blue Bonnet,
right,
stuff like that, but in case just had to have it.
correct,
Then we could make that decision and we ratify it at the next
Correct.
meeting. Okay.
correct. Yeah, next slide. So we talked about that, you know, where these, they gotta be physical or electronic bulletins at a place convenient to the public. There have been cases, these rules exist because cities have posted their notice like on this wall. That doesn't do it. And then you lock the front door. Doesn't do it. It's gotta be accessible to the public. All right, next slide. Oh, well, and it says, I mean, it said accessible at all times. So that 72 hours is, you can't have it up for, 36 hours, take it down for 12 hours, or, and then put it back up for, it's gotta be 72 consecutive hours, okay? Emergency, we talked about this, imminent threat to public health or safety. Reasonably unforeseeable situation, and again, fires, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, power failures. That would also obviously include utility failures. Epidemics, riots, civil disturbances, enemy attacks. Goodness, you hope none of these things ever happen, right? But that's what an emergency is. Okay, next slide. Notify the media. That's an important part of that emergency meeting. You can't notify the public in general, but you can, if you have electricity and you can put it on your website, you put it on your website. And you call up your local TV, radio, whoever, and you email them, fax them the notice, and you say, hey guys, this is what we're doing. As you know, there's this public calamity that you're reporting on. The city of Bruceville-Eddy has to meet about, whatever, the flood, the riot, the whatever. And you provide them a copy of that, and you keep a record of you having provided it to them. Okay? And then, again, clearly identify the emergency. Okay, next slide. Recessing meetings. Reposting isn't necessary if the meeting resumes the following business day and it's made in good faith. So, for example, if you're ever in a meeting that goes until 2 in the morning and you guys say, I can't take it anymore, we have to come back tomorrow, you can come back tomorrow. However, I was in a meeting until 3:30 in the morning one time. I don't recommend it, not fun. So this is, again, unless you're, what is the reason for the recess? It's got to be good faith. It can't be, well, we've got these people we don't like hearing from here tonight, but if we recess and come back tomorrow, they probably won't be
Maybe
here.
they won't show up.
Right, no, you can't, don't do that. Okay, next slide. We talked about this. Actions are voidable, and ratification at a subsequently properly noticed meeting may be allowed. It might be allowed. You can ratify, there are some things you can ratify, and there are some things you can't ratify. And that gets very specific, very technical. As a general rule, if you have the power to do it, you have the power to ratify it. If you didn't have the power to do it in the first place, you don't have the power to ratify it. So I've written a lot. I've written a lot about that, and I can give you a lot of examples. They're very boring and esoteric, but the point is, most things that you have the power to do, you can ratify. However, there are cases out there where they talk about a city that is engaged in a pattern and practice of intentional violations of the Open Meetings Act, and some things have not been allowed to be ratified. Very rare, but if you're intentionally violating the Open Meetings Act, that can happen. Next slide. Meeting locations, accessible, located in the boundaries of the jurisdiction with certain exceptions, accessible to individuals with disabilities. Okay? Now this just came up for one client. They had a retreat, which is one of the permissible exceptions to having it within your jurisdiction. They had a retreat. There was no action taken. They were considering charter amendments. And so they had it, the council was attending like a TML conference. And so they decided, hey, as long as we're here at the TML conference, why don't we have a meeting, an open meeting, public, it was, and we can discuss charter amendments. That's permissible. It was unpopular because people felt like they were doing it to get out of the public eye, even though the city took no action and could take no action because it wasn't posted that way. Just so keep that in mind.
Okay.
Next slide. Quorum. If you leave and it's less than a quorum, you have to recess until the quorum is present. Okay? Next slide. The public must be able to attend and record by video. Okay? If I want to take out my phone and I want to hold it up and I want to record everything you're saying, I can do that. What I can't do, if I'm a member of the public, is come and set up my tripod with my giant VHS camera right here
Right.
and block everyone or be a disruption. I can't do that. Public comments. The right to address the governmental bodies in open meeting. So this gets very technical and very tricky. What I will tell you though is that when the law says that the governmental body may impose reasonable limits, but you cannot unfairly discriminate among speakers, what that means is that if you have a public, you have your citizens' comments and you place a 3-minute limit, which is pretty common for most cities. Typically what I've seen is 3 minutes max. You can't allow the folks you like to go on for 10 and cut off the folks you don't like at 2.5.
Yeah.
Okay? It's got to be across the board. Okay? And, yes, sir.
But just to clarify, we can set, civility rules for those.
We're getting there.
Okay.
So here's what's here's what's next. You can adopt rules that set forth like what you're talking about. Okay. I can't come in here and be disorderly. Basically, disorderly conduct. Okay. But mayor, or mayor pro tem, whoever is in charge of the meeting at any given meeting, whoever that is, you have the right as the mayor to shut someone down if they refuse to be quiet, if they raise their voice, if they whatever. I mean, it's,
Yes, sir.
I mean, you have that right. Now, you need to use it judiciously, okay? You need to give them a warning. If you're going to, I recommend an adoption of like a time limit and a policy. If you don't have one, a policy for public speakers shall do these things, right? And we can help you with that. But if someone just refuses, chief,
Oh, trust me. Yeah.
escort them out. And you have that authority to do that. Now, they're going to tell you, you're violating my First Amendment rights. You're going to go to jail. You're a terrible person. Don't believe them.
I don't.
Okay. All right, it's you as the chair of a governmental body's meeting has the authority to control that meeting.
Yes, sir.
And there are a lot of cases, this is what these folks don't like to hear, a lot of cases where the right of the public is the right to observe these meetings. I have a right to observe and listen to what you're saying and the decisions you make. I don't have a First Amendment right to inject myself into the meeting and disrupt it. And there's a big difference, and there's a lot of cases on that. Public comments for items not on the agenda. Again, you said this at the beginning, you guys have that down. You can recite existing policy, you can make a statement of specific factual information, but you cannot deliberate as a group, right? You can't, well, I think this, and you gotta shut that down, Okay, next slide. Broadcasting open meetings. You may broadcast over the internet. Some are required to, that doesn't apply to you. So you can read that at your leisure, but it doesn't apply to you. But you do. You post it on YouTube. And so that's great. That's good. Record keeping. If you're going to do that and you're going to keep those records, you need to maintain the records because we'll talk about that in Public Information Act. Okay, next slide. Executive sessions. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this because we got to move on to Public Information Act too. But this is really important. Okay, couple of things to remember. First of all, most of the meetings I attend, I'm attending them for executive session because I'm here to talk to most of my clients about litigation. Okay, so I do a lot of executive session work. If you're going to go into executive session, it has to be under one of the exceptions. Okay? And I've been asked this many times by well-meaning council members. Well, there's this item, and it's a hot topic. We really don't want to discuss that in open session. Can we talk about it in executive session? Well, put like that, no. You can't have a policy discussion, a general policy discussion back there. You're going to have general policy discussions out here. Now, do you have a legal question? Can we go back there and talk about legal questions? Yes, absolutely. Yes, sir.
We had that happen when you was here, and we had other lawyers here, and it was like people was jumping on a certain lawyer, and I asked if we could go to executive. Was that proper, or was that right?
If you are retiring to executive session to get the advice of your attorney,
Okay, we was voting for an attorney.
Yeah.
oh, well, but that's a personnel. So remember, remember, there are 25 exceptions. I don't have them all memorized, but personnel is one of them.
Okay.
And you can retire to executive session to discuss personnel decisions.
Okay.
Okay?
But
So
it has to be posted on the agenda, right?
it has to be posted on the agenda,
Yeah.
and you have to post it as a personnel item. So here are the ones that you see most commonly: attorney-client, real estate, personnel. There are others, but those are the three that you see all the time.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in the particular case, that would be the hiring and termination of an employee or a contractor.
Mhm.
So we could go in executive session to deliberate over that.
Yes, sir.
Would that be correct?
That would be correct. If you had posted a personnel item tonight for action, at the end of this thing, you go, God, I can't listen to Bullock anymore. Out. You could do that. Now, you didn't post that tonight, so tonight you can't fire me. But maybe next time.
Right.
Okay? But yes, absolutely. And here's why. And it's the same rationale for the real estate exception. Okay? What cases say about real estate, you're spending taxpayer money. You're gonna go buy whatever, real estate or real property, like a tank or whatever, police cars. if you had to sit out here and you had to talk about all of your bargaining positions, right? You know, you would put the taxpayers at a disadvantage if you had to talk about all of your bargaining positions out in open. So whether it's real estate or it's buying police cars or you're talking about settling a case or a claim. Okay, well, we'll pay this much to settle, but we won't pay, this much, right? Those kinds of decisions, as long as it's properly noticed, can occur in closed session. Okay?
Okay, now there have been times, and this is way back, where I've sat out there and I've watched and the discussion up here, the more they started to discuss the issue, the more it led into liability.
Mhm.
We didn't have a city attorney present, and I personally felt that we needed to end the discussion, have the city attorney here and go into executive session, or they go into it, because I was out there. But they needed to stop discussing it here because they were actually going into an area where you now recorded publicly things that are a liability to the city. Now, they could go into executive session like that if they wanted to deliberate
Yes, sir.
over an issue.
And so there's a general rule about posting for executive session. Okay, right? You have to post the specific item. However, there have been times in my career when I've been, as a city attorney, I've been sitting in the audience listening to counsel. And there's an item that's posted, and they get into negotiations, liability, whatever the case may be. And I've stood up and I've said, counsel, you're the counsel, you can make this decision, but you are discussing things that can and maybe should be discussed in executive session. It's my recommendation as your attorney that we retire to executive session to discuss this particular item in closed session. And I as attorney have a duty to maintain your confidences and to give you that advice. Now, there have been times when the city has said, oh, yep, we're going to break and we're going to go into executive session. Pursuant to 551.071, city attorney, we're going to retire to executive session to receive advice from our attorney. We go back, 5 minutes later, we come back out. There have been times when council members have said, you know what? We want the public to hear this. Okay, you're the city. That's right. I mean, you want to talk about it in public? You can. Yes, sir.
Just because it's not on the agenda to have executive session, in other words, we list a topic and then have executive session, doesn't mean that you can't go into executive session.
For attorney, only for attorney.
Only for attorney.
Only for attorney-client communication.
Okay.
So it can be, you can have any item, and what I recommend to what I do for my cities, if you don't already have this, is there's a boilerplate language at the bottom that the city reserves the right to retire into executive session on any item to get advice from our attorney.
It'd be like tonight's, you talking. If we thought, we need to go to executive session on this and take advice from our attorney.
Right.
Then we could do that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And somebody makes a motion, and you say, we think we need to go back into executive session to get advice from our attorney, and you can do that on any item. Yes.
Say you're not here, can we go back here and call you?
You can go back there and call me.
Okay.
Because attorneys,
You don't have to be here.
right, attorneys can appear in executive session via phone. That's permissible under the act.
Okay, good.
But if we have a personnel, issue on there, and then we don't have an executive session, but then it turns into, well, maybe we need to go back in executive session, then we can still do that on personnel.
Not personnel,
Not
Not
personal.
personnel.
no.
But if we,
Just to get attorney, so let me tell you this. If you're gonna have anything on an agenda ever that deals with personnel, you also put an executive session item on. So that way you have the option,
Okay,
always.
okay, so always list executive session under.
Whether we do it or not.
Whether you do it or not. Just because you
Okay.
list it doesn't mean you have to go back.
Right.
But if you have listed it for personnel, yes, sir. Personnel, anything dealing with real estate,
Right.
economic development, Anything like that, that falls within those boundaries, that item you also listed on executive session, so you can go back if necessary.
All right.
Okay. All right, next slide. So here are the big ones. Attorney-client, personnel, real property, prospective gifts, I know that's a big one. Security devices, which is kind of weird, but if you, like you don't want to talk about your security, out in the open, right? And then economic development negotiations. That's a big one. If someone comes to you with hey, we want to develop X. Not only can you discuss that in executive session, you don't have to identify the party who came to you with that proposed contract. You can give it a code name. Project Big Balloon. Well, I don't, whatever. I mean, seriously, I've seen names like that, right? And
didn't
cities
know
do
that.
that. You assign a code name to it. And while you are negotiating, while you're in that process of economic development negotiation, because you may not want to tip off your neighbor, you may not want Troy or whoever to know about who,
Okay.
because it might be a Costco or it might be a gas station or whatever it may be, So you might call it Operation Big Box, right? And cities do that all the time, and it's perfectly permissible. But at some point, when you get to the point of signing a contract with them, well, then you got to identify them, right? When you're going to approve it. But when you're negotiating, you can
EDA.
identify it that way. Next slide. Okay, attorney-client, when you seek the advice about pending or contemplated litigation or settlement offers, that's, so any cases, any claim, settlement, whatever, or, and this is where it applies to, like, on any item, right? If you need, if the city determines and I determine as your attorney that there is an item that is on your agenda and I need to give you legal advice about how to proceed or give you a heads up about something that's legal advice on whatever it is, if I have a duty under the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct, I can advise you of that, and we go back there and we discuss that item in closed session. Because just like you and you and you individually have the right to talk to your attorney privately, so does the city. And so it's not to hide things from the public, but if someone gets mad at you for having a private conversation with your attorney, you ask them, okay, that's fine, but next time you have a conversation with your attorney, can I watch? No? Okay, same rules apply. It's the same rule. Next slide. Personnel, appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, dismissal. If it deals with personnel at all, anything. If you're going to give them a raise, you're going to give them a demotion, you're going to, whatever, you can discuss it in executive session. You're going to hear a complaint or a charge against an officer or employee. You can do that in closed session. Well, public officer. Or
A councilman, mayor.
Correct. Or it could be any, but they just mean public officer generally. Okay. Or any employee. However, and this is important, if the officer or employee who is the subject of the deliberation or hearing requests a public hearing, they want you to, what did I do? You tell everyone in public. Well, they get it. Now, after you do that, and we determine, I need to give you advice about how to proceed, then we, without the employee, can go back to executive session. And I can advise you under attorney-client like that. But if the employee wants to, have you tell them, okay, well, I think you violated policy A, B, and C, if they want that in public, they get it in public. Next slide. Same thing with real estate. It's to protect the negotiating position of the city. Now, see this? not to negotiate with a third party? I've got 3 cases right now, 3 separate cases, where cities have allowed developers, the third party with whom they are negotiating, back into executive session to negotiate in private. That's illegal. Don't do it. Can't do it. You cannot bring the party with whom you're negotiating into executive session. There are cases and attorney general opinions that say no bueno. Okay? And the reason is because here's what's happened, right? We got the attorney back there. Well, guess what you've just done? You waived attorney-client privilege. You've also violated the Open Meetings Act because you're deliberating a matter of public importance in private, right? Where the members of the public can't see the negotiation. I want to, everybody understand, you can't ever bring third parties who are unaffiliated with the city into an executive session unless, very limited exception, you are being sued, and the tax appraisal district is being sued together. You're being sued together over the same lawsuit. Could you and the tax appraisal district representative retire to your executive session to discuss strategy? Yes, you could. Yes, you could if you're aligned. But if it's you versus the tax appraisal district in litigation, you can't go back there together. Okay? All right, next slide. Remember, no voting in executive session. You can express your opinions. This is how I will vote. This is what I think. This is how I think you should vote. Right? You can say all that, but you can't take votes back there. You got to come out and vote out here. Next. Well, and the discussion, and I've been in a bunch of these, where the discussion back there, where you start talking about the merits of a policy, and you start talking about, now this is what I would do, not just how I would vote, but these are the policy points that I want. There have been times where I have gone, you know what, folks? I'm going to advise you to stop because you've gone beyond attorney-client. You're not getting legal advice. You're just talking policy at this point. That needs to be out there. Okay? So just bear that in mind.
That's good to know.
So when you go into executive session, you have to follow the steps. If you don't follow the steps, that's a technical violation. So you got to announce it. You got to read off the agenda item. You got to read off the exception that allows you to go back. Pretty simple, but when it gets late, you get tired, people have forgotten it, oops. It's a problem. And then you have to keep a certified agenda or make a recording as required by law for every closed meeting except if we go back to just get attorney-client communications, advice from your lawyer. You don't have to keep a certified agenda for that portion, and you don't have to record that portion. Okay? You don't have to do both. You don't have to do both the certified agenda and a recording, but you must do one. Okay, next. Certified agendas are very boring. They never say as much as members of the public or opposing litigants think they're going to say, but they have to follow these requirements. I mean, what did you deliberate? You have to state no action was taken, the beginning time, the times, and that it's true and correct. I mean, so it's, one page, simple, but it needs to be done. Next slide. They are not available to the public. You may not give them out. Even if you get an open records request for one, you can't turn it over. That's where you pick up the phone, you call me, and you say, hey, we need a AG opinion.
Yeah, because what goes on back there stays back there.
Yes, ma'am. Next slide. We talked about this already. Only members of the governing body have the right to attend, but employees may attend if it's necessary for the closed meeting. So if a person, personnel or, whatever. But it can't be a person, again, who would undermine the legal basis for the closed meeting. So the developer or whoever, right? It's usually developers, but that's who it is. Yes, ma'am.
What about us, per se, in social media? What is our, stuff on that? I mean, I know we're elected officials,
Mhm.
all of us, so, cause I was told when I first started, be careful what you say out there, cause you could get us sued.
Yes.
So, we're not supposed to argue with anybody, we're not supposed to talk about anything that goes on, or what we can do or what we can't
Right.
do, correct?
Yeah. Well, so.
I just wanna make sure I was doing right.
Right, we'll talk
I
about
got my
social
hands
media,
slapped so
we'll
many
talk about
times.
social media stuff a little bit more in public information, because
Okay.
that can become a public record,
Yes.
subject to open records requests, okay? Now, here's the other thing to remember about executive session. It's like Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in executive session stays in executive session. The members of the body, no individual member has the right to disclose what goes on back there in executive session, because the privilege, the attorney-client privilege, I'm here, I represent the city of Bruceville-Eddy. I don't represent any single individual. I represent you all, like if you get sued and that kind of stuff, I represent you. But my first responsibility is to the city. And the city as an entity, as a municipal corporate entity, holds the privilege. And so, now, can you vote to waive the privilege? Sure, you can vote to waive the privilege.
Okay.
You can. I mean, just like any other corporate entity can vote to waive its privilege, or you as an individual can decide to waive your attorney-client privilege, you can make that decision. But how do cities act? Open meeting, agenda, majority vote.
Okay.
Okay? Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback on what the mayor talked about, and you said we were gonna talk about, is that social media. So cause that can get into a quorum.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll talk about that in a minute too in the public information.
So let's talk about that a little bit in the context of a quorum. Okay? So city council members have gotten in trouble with potential open meetings violations, either these little, devices that are, we all need them, but they get us all in trouble, okay? Because they have been, during meetings, texting each other, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, what do you think about this? Well, guess what? Those are probably open records that you must maintain. And if you get on a group chat and 3 of you are texting each other in a group chat, I think I'm going to vote this way. I don't think I'm going to vote for this. I don't like that. Guess what? That whole group chat that the public can't see, that's an open meetings violation.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
So protect yourself, don't do it. Similar with, so it doesn't matter if it's a text or if it's your Facebook page. If it's your Facebook page and you're posting stuff about the meeting as it's going on your Facebook page, and you hop on the Facebook page and you hop on the Facebook page and you're all saying, well, I think this is a wonderful idea. Same thing, same principle. It doesn't matter if it's a text or the app or whatever it is. If you're having conversations about the public business, particularly during a meeting that the whole public can't see, that's an open meetings violation. Don't do it.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yes. All right, next. Again, you can use the conference, we talked about that. Conference with the attorney is fine. Telephone conference if it's an emergency or urgent public necessity. So again, if it's an emergency,
Sorry, drop my ring.
if we get into that very rare emergency situation, there are special rules that apply to telephone conferences and video conferencing. But just for regular, for 99% of the time, the rule is you got to have a quorum here, right? And then you can have 1 or 2 people elsewhere and they can participate if their technology is good enough.
Okay.
Next slide. And again, you can participate remotely if, okay? It's broadcast live, the quorum is physically present, the location where you are is physically present, is open to the public during open portions of the meeting. So, I mean, so I've had members appear like this when they were on vacation, but they wanted to participate in the meeting. So technically, when you're in your hotel room participating in a meeting, if someone comes and knocks at your door and says, hey, I want to sit in here while you're doing this meeting for Bruceville-Eddy while you're off in the Bahamas, unlikely as that might be, you'd have to let them in. It's crazy, but there you go, it's the law.
That's part of the public.
That's right, that's the member of the public, the Bahamian public, so, you know, it's unlikely, but
It's
again,
yeah.
I mean, but again, you know,
Could
you can't, in other words, you can't go lock yourself in a little room somewhere while you're, you know, appearing remotely. Theoretically, it has to be open to the public,
Oh, okay.
okay? So, you know, I don't know how you prove that. I don't know how a violation would be proved, in other words, right? Like, you know, but nonetheless, you know, don't lock yourself in the closet when you participate remote. Okay?
So make sure you have clothes on.
Make sure, please, 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 don't get in trouble like that. Okay, next slide. Members may deliberate about public business or policy on an online message board as long as certain requirements are met. No voting or formal action. TOMA established posting and archiving requirements as well as technical requirements to create an online message board. That's not the same thing as social media as your Facebook account. That's the city's website
Right.
or something like that, okay? You don't control you think, oh, it's my data on Facebook. No, it's not. It's Facebook's data. Facebook controls it. You don't, okay?
That's right.
You don't have control of that data. You can't archive it, control it properly, make it available to the public properly. So don't confuse this with Facebook, okay? It's not the same thing.
Okay.
Next page. Knowingly, okay? If you knowingly do these things, then you could be in trouble. So don't, you know, so either do them unknowingly or don't do them at all. But let's, you know, I mean, we all know what it would be to do a knowing violation of the Open Meetings Act, okay? If you participate in a closed meeting that's not open to the public, or you do a walking quorum, you know, we all know what those things are. So that's what you can get criminal penalties for. Next slide. We talked about walking quorum. It's from one to the other to the other. It's illegal, and you can't do it. You know, I mean, it's just because that's the perfect example of a way to get around the Open Meetings Act. Next slide. Here's your vacation. If you do a walking quorum, you're a closed meeting violation, okay? You can get a nice little up to 6 month vacation. Next slide. So this is the big one for me as your city attorney, because like if you guys go to jail, I'd hate that, but you know, but what's a problem for the city of Bruceville-Eddy is the voidability of the actions you take if they're taken in violation of the Open Meetings Act, okay? So some big important thing that the city council votes on and approves could be voided by a taxpayer standing lawsuit. Any member of the public, okay? Individuals can sue to prevent or cure violations of TOMA, okay? Anybody can, doesn't have to be a citizen, anybody. All right, next slide. All right, so that's not too bad. I only went 30 minutes over, but I think the Open Meetings Act
Well, too many questions for me, probably.
is, well, I think, I mean, the TPIA is important, don't get me wrong, but the Open Meetings Act is the way y'all do business, and understanding how it operates is really, really important. I won't go, we'll cover the TPIA, but that is, you guys aren't involved in the day-to-day handling of paper as much as your staff is. And so staff is really, you know, who deals with the TPIA. You guys deal with the TOMA, they deal with TPIA for the most part. Now, here's the most important thing I'm going to tell you about TPIA as it applies to you. If you use your personal emails, phones, texting, Facebook, whatever, to discuss public business, you become what the TPIA calls a temporary custodian of public records. And what that means is that you have a responsibility, you individually, have a responsibility to maintain those records, not destroy those records, and make them available to the city of Bruceville-Eddy, your staff, and your attorney, upon demand. And if you don't do that, you can get sued for that. And if you destroy them, you can get in trouble with the criminal penalties in the TPIA. So be very, very careful with using personal devices, email, whatever it is, for public business, because let me tell you here's the horror story. Okay, represented a client years ago, and he was a very competent city manager, had been doing it for 25 years. But like we all do, he got a little sloppy with his email practices. And so he occasionally would send out emails regarding city business from his personal email account, because he'd get stuff at all hours, you know, and he'd send it back out that way. And then we get this giant public information request. And so he has to do a search for all of these records. And he gives them to us. And it's, thousands of emails, right? Hard to review, hard to read. Well, guess what got accidentally turned over and disclosed to the public as part of the public information that he got turned over on his personal email? The emails that he exchanged with his mistress. Oops. Now, public information? No. But, it's like, well, the skunk's already in the jury box, right? It's already, you're not getting it back. So, just, take it for what it's worth, Keep your emails with your mistresses on a separate email, all right? That's my advice to you. Yes?
Question would be, I prefer to use my personal phone number for people to contact me, because if they call the city,
Sure.
there's really not a number for the council member.
Sure.
So that would be okay. Now, if they sent me a text, because for some reason they know that also is my cell phone number, so if they sent me a text, then I have to record that for the city?
You have to maintain it. If it deals with public business, it's a public record. Because if I get, or Kent gets a public information request, give me all council members' emails, and any electronic communications regarding this project. And you've got 37,000 texts regarding that project. Kent's got to go to you and say, I need your phone. And you're going to say, over my dead body, and then, it's a problem.
Under the term, make a record of, if I were to take, if somebody does send me a text, then I take that text and print it out and save it as a written copy. Is that considered the same? It's not the original document.
It's a good question. And it's a good question. Now, could they ask for it in its native format? You know what that is, right?
Yes, I do.
They could ask for it in its native format, and whether or not they get it in its native format is very fact specific about why do you need it in its native format. But as you know, could they get it in its native format under certain circumstances? Yes, under certain circumstances they could.
Okay.
So, what I would recommend is, you know, if you're gonna have texts, you know, from time to time that deal with that kind of stuff, what I would do is I would either save the texts as screenshots and then save them as files. So at least that version has been saved, and you stick them in a folder, and that way if it's ever an issue, or you turn them over to Kent, you know, and that way they're maintained by the city. But just, you know, for your own peace of mind and work, you know, I mean, because if you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of texts, you know, that can be a hassle to gather all that stuff up.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of times you may get the text, but you don't have to answer it.
That is correct. You could answer it from city
So
email
then it
or
wouldn't be anything
whatever,
that would get you.
right? But you should still save the text
Save it,
itself. Yes, sir.
What if you just don't email? I don't email.
Sure.
I have an email account. I couldn't tell you what it is. I don't even know my password.
So it's, I mean, if you're, you know, I mean, if you may have emails from constituents about public business because they happen to know your personal email, right? It's possible. What I would recommend is before any of you do some mass deletion of emails, you know, and you think that there might be city business in them, then maybe don't. I mean, you know, I mean,
It's always in the cloud.
it should be in the cloud, it should be saved somewhere,
I don't know
but,
what email it is.
you know,
I literally don't answer emails. People, I don't even know how I can tell you what my email is.
sure,
I think I got it memorized, but I wouldn't know how to answer it.
Yeah.
sure.
I don't
And
think
that's,
I've ever gotten an email from you yet.
you know, and I mean, I get it, and I understand that, and you're okay. But the problem comes in if you do like mass deletions, right?
I don't even know how to do that.
So, well, you know, sometimes big batches of emails go missing for, you know, it happens. But as long as you don't get rid of them permanently, then it's okay. But if we ask you for them, you have to do a good faith search too.
And
You know,
that's
you
any
have to,
type of
you have to be
social
able to, you gotta be able to, you know, raise your right hand and swear and go, yeah, Judge, I did a good faith search. And as long as you can do that, okay, you know, that's your call.
And that could be email, text, or
Now,
Facebook.
text,
Facebook.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep.
email.
It could be anything, any electronic communication, you know, which is it's
But you
everything.
can delete them, but they're always there. They can be found.
Typically, that's true. Typically, that's
You
true.
shouldn't delete them at all, is what you're saying.
If it deals with public business, yeah, if it deals with public
Just let it
business,
drop down.
then no, don't delete it if it deals with public business. Because a version will probably exist somewhere in the cloud that someone will find, and when they ask for it and you don't turn it over and they know that it's out there, then you're in trouble.
Because somebody, trust me, has copied it.
Somebody has. Yeah. Okay. So that's the most important part about the TPIA. Everything else is easy.
Okay.
All right, next. Okay. So the policy is towards openness. Now, there are a lot of words after that, but that's what you need to remember, is that the way that the Attorney General and courts construe this is in favor of openness. Okay? The default is public information. That's the default. Okay? And that's what we want. I mean, you know, as a democracy, right? We want people involved,
Yes.
you know, and so that's why we're here, and that's why you're having to listen to me. So next slide. What is public information? It is anything that is, here's the broadest definition, in connection with the transaction of official business. If it's connected in any way to the transaction of official business, it's a public record, okay? By the city, for the city. If you get it from someone else, anytime someone emails you about public, that's why if they email you about public information, their email becomes public information. So does it in any way pertain to the official business of the city? Yeah. All right, next.
She just stepped out.
Oops.
Pam, you got it?
That's okay.
Can you do it, Pam?
Okay,
Oh.
you changed it, good, thank you, ma'am.
So what is the transaction of official business? I mean, it's kind of redundant, but again, if it's created by, transmitted to, received by, maintained by, I mean, it's, you know, if it touches the city of Bruceville-Eddy, it's Bruceville-Eddy public business. And so even if it's purely personal, but you receive it at your, you know, Bruceville-Eddy email or whatever, you know, Bruceville-Eddy phone or whatever you might have, then it becomes public information, okay? Any electronic communication. When they say any, they mean any, everything. So that's why Facebook can become public information that we don't maintain, okay? Next. I mean, redundant, but any matter. I mean, it's, you know, if it deals with the city, it's official business. All right, next. All right, again, this one's not as much fun, but anything. I mean, it can be anything, any physical material on which information may be recorded. So when all of those vellum public records you have, you better hang on to them. But again, data. I mean, that's the important word right there. If it's data, it's public information and it's subject to this. All right, next slide. You're a governmental body. So are all of these. That's, you know, but not the judiciary and not the legislature. Lucky them. Next. What is a request? Citizen comes up to you and says, can you give me these documents? Not an official public information request, okay? Got to be in writing, all right? Now, the question has become, to whom must it be sent? It didn't go to the city secretary, so therefore it's not. Look, if it comes to any of you, treat it like it's a public information request. If it's in writing, treat it that way.
In
Get
writing
it,
only.
yeah, in writing, but get it to Kent, who can get it to me if necessary. I mean, obviously, some of these can be handled, you know, directly, and Kent knows that, your staff knows that, but there are times that we have to request an AG opinion, and there are deadlines that are important, and we'll talk about those. Yes, ma'am.
Because there's a lot of citizens that will come up to any of the council members, or myself, and go, hey, what about what happened last meeting? Can you give me the information on that? So we have to tell them then in writing. You have to request that in writing, and then I'll give it to whoever's in charge,
Right.
and they'll get it to you, right?
Right.
Is that how we do it? Okay.
That is correct.
Because,
That's-
I mean, it's simple to somebody say something, I go, well, we talked about, you know, I mean, it's easy to do that.
Sure.
So I just want
Sure.
to make sure.
I think what we're talking about specifically here is,
I don't want to get in trouble.
no, you can definitely discuss what happened at a council meeting. You can discuss what's going on with the city. But what we're talking about here with the Public
Paper.
Information Act is specific,
Data.
you know, recorded information.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
like documents on budget, or sending our budget notes from a committee
Okay,
meeting or something
okay.
like that.
So yes, I'm glad, I didn't understand what you were
I
kind of
apologize.
getting. No, that's okay.
As I told you, I'm terrible about
No,
the
so
words
here's,
here.
so again, anything that gets discussed out here, you can talk about. If it's
Okay.
back there, don't talk about it. But anything that gets discussed out here, you can talk about. And it's perfectly permissible for a member of the public to come up to you and say, hey, I couldn't make the
Yeah.
last meeting, can you give me this? And you can go to Kent and you can say, Kent, print this up for me so I can give it to Mrs. Jones. I mean, you can do that,
All right.
but it's not a proper TPIA request, okay? And so the deadlines and everything else don't kick in. And if somebody asks you for something and you forget to give it to them, and then they go file a complaint with the AG, AG is gonna go, well, where's your written request? No request, no written request, no violations, easy, okay? But if it comes in the form of writing, no matter where you get it, forward it to Kent so we can deal with it, because we got deadlines that start running immediately upon
Gotcha.
receipt.
It says up there, email too.
Yes, yes, you can do it. I mean, again, it doesn't need to, if you can read the written, whatever it is, and you can discern that they are asking for public records, then your obligation to give them those public records that you can discern that exist kicks in. Now, you don't have to create public records for them, just like you don't have to create records in Discovery, right? I don't have to create records for you. If they say to you, give me a spreadsheet of police calls to this part of town, and if that already exists and you've already made one, then you can give it out. But they can't say, make me a spreadsheet for police calls to this part of town. If it doesn't exist, you don't have to make one.
Does that
Okay?
consist of council too, if we ask
Yeah.
that question?
Yeah, I mean, they nobody,
So we have to have it in writing.
right,
Didn't know that either.
yes, sir.
When we was hiring Kent, one of the other guys that was up for the job, after we hired Kent, he wanted, public records. He sent public records for all of us for what questions we asked in the back room.
Right, yeah,
Is,
nope. If you wrote them down,
yes.
and there was a record of all the questions you asked Kent, and it's a document that exists at the time that the written request is made,
Yeah.
turn it over.
Yeah.
Because I asked questions, but I didn't write any of them
Yeah,
down.
but you don't have, you're gonna see these kinds of requests. Give me, tell me what that is. Tell me this information. Well, if it's a record that exists, great. If it's
Yeah,
not a
'cause that was-
record that exists,
Before we answered him, we sent it to the attorney.
Yeah.
And they looked it over and said, answer this.
yeah, you don't have to answer questions, though. The Public Information Act is not a question and answer act.
Right.
It's a records act. Okay, next. So, again, any, any method of delivery is fine, okay? That's what you should take from that. If you get that any way, shape or form, it's been properly delivered. Get it to Kent, get it to me, okay? Doesn't matter.
All right.
All right, next. So yes, can you designate one mailing address and one email address? Yes, you may designate one. You can. But what you don't want to do, what's not worth your time, is to deal with the litigation, because I've done it, over, well, I sent it to the mayor, but it's got to go to the city secretary. You didn't send it to the city secretary. My recommendation to you, even if you designate one email address as the email address,
CC the others.
CC the other, send it to Kent, send it to me. It's not worth the fight,
Yeah.
frankly. You'll spend more money fighting over the email, the right email, than you will just answering it,
Right.
okay? But if you want to do it that way, you can do it that way. The law says you can, so you can. You want to be a stickler? You can be a stickler and say one email address, okay? Or one physical address, one hand delivery. And usually that person is the city secretary, because they're your custodian of records. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I just tell you, I and everyone in my firm, if anybody at the city gets it, get it to us and we're gonna deal with it. It's
Okay.
just easier, frankly. Next slide. Now, unclear or broad requests. So you cannot ask them why they want it. Hey, what do you need this for? Nope, don't do it. Now, if they ask you for, give me all the city records related to concrete. Well, What do you mean? Like concrete we've bought, concrete that's in the ground, you can ask them to clarify a overly broad request,
But not
okay?
why you want it.
And then when you do that, that kicks in a deadline, okay? And that puts off other deadlines. They have to respond, and if they don't respond, you don't have to do anything. And you don't have to, get an AG opinion and all that. But typically, when you get a request like that that you can't discern, usually we're getting a copy of it, and we're usually my office is the one drafting the request for clarification. Okay. But you can do it, but you just have to follow those guidelines within, you have to be careful that you're not asking them for the purpose and that kind of stuff, All right, next slide. So, when you get a request, you must promptly produce information for inspection, duplication, or both. And what that means is, promptly means promptly. There are deadlines we'll talk about in a minute when you have to ask for an AG opinion. And I will tell you that most cities and we'd say, okay, well, our deadline to respond to this PIA request was the 10 business days. Well, technically that's not true. Technically, if they come in and they ask for one sheet of paper, and it's and I can produce it to you right then you should produce it to them promptly. Don't sit on it and wait. That's really what the AG opinions say, okay? But if you need to ask the AG about whether information is accepted from disclosure, then you need to get it to my office. We have a TPIA division. We have lawyers in my firm who that's all they do. I used to do it, but this is a great way for younger lawyers to learn, government law and TPIA and that kind of stuff. And that's what we do. We get them in, and all of the cities we represent, all 65 or 70 cities that we represent all over the state, all the TPIA requests go to these youngsters, and they're really good and they know what they're doing. If it needs to be, if I need to step in or any of the other partners or whoever, we step in when we need to. But it makes for more efficient work, quicker turnaround, because that's all they do. And they calendar the deadlines and they do it. And so the one that you sent to us, we forwarded it to our TPIA lawyers, and they turn it around and they get the answers, and that's what they do. But, I've done a lot of them and can, but it's just quicker, better for y'all. All right, next. Promptly, as soon as possible under the circumstances, but at a minimum within normal business hours. And if you can't produce information requested within 10 business days after the date of the request, you have to certify that fact in writing and set a date with a reasonable time. Now that happens when you're going to get a request for, give me the records of the city of Bruceville-Eddy. It's going to be like, well, that's a lot. It's going to take a little while, okay? So that's when, we'll have to work together when you get that kind of a request, because they happen from time to time. But there are ways to deal with that, which we will recommend. We'll get to in a minute. All right, next slide. AG opinions. You have to request an AG opinion within 10 business days unless you have a previous determination, and that's, it has to be very specific. Like, it's the previous determination is like this exact question, All right, next slide. Previous determinations applicable to a particular governmental body, applicable only to specific information, or type 2 may be applicable to all governmental bodies and applicable to precise, clearly delineated category of information, right? So sometimes it's easier to ask for an opinion because it's actually harder to determine if this specific question has ever been asked you know, like in the history of the world for Bruceville-Eddy. You know, like, you know, that's not easy to ascertain. So usually we just ask for opinions. Next. Now, you're going to ask the AG for a ruling and state the exceptions. You notify the requester, and we do all this stuff, you know, and we provide them a copy of your letter to the AG, you know, and then, next slide, and then the 15th business day, we provide all of this to the AG. And we'll give you guys, you know, your house copy, but, you know, you tell the AG, this is why these exceptions apply. And you have to write a brief. I mean, you got to, you know, tell them all of the legal reasons why we shouldn't turn over these documents. And you give them the documents or representative copies if it's a large, you know, tranche of records. And you say, here are representative records. This is why, and this is what they look like. And then you're going to get back a decision from the AG within, I think, the 60 days. That'll be there in a minute. But you get back a decision from them and you go, okay, you don't have to turn this over, but you do turn this over. And they make it real clear, they mark everything. So it's pretty simple. Next. And then again, you send all of your comments without the records to the AG. Now, business days. There's recent litigation about what business days means. So here's the short version. Business days, if it is a state or federal official closed holiday, then you don't count that for a business day, right? You don't count weekends, and you don't count, you know, the official day that New Year's is observed, or Christmas, or Thanksgiving, or, you know, whatever. All of the official federal or state holidays. However, there are some, like there's that, you know, the state has skeleton crew days, or some cities have adopted like a special, like San Antonio has a Battle of Flowers or something like that, you know, right? Where the city offices are closed. And I loved when I worked for the city of San Antonio, it was great, you know, like a free day, right? Well, there's a recent litigation that says that those special city holidays, you don't take those off the business days. It's only official state, federal holidays for business days. Okay, so that's an important distinction. I don't know if you guys have any like that, but just be aware if you ever do adopt, you know, like Bruceville-Eddy Day, you know, then that will still be a business day. Okay, next slide. If you miss a deadline, mandatory exceptions are not waived. If you have a permissive exception, then missing a deadline is not fatal. I was involved in litigation over this issue where, you know, again, you know, sometimes, I mean, you miss a deadline, the client doesn't get you the documents until the day before they're due, or, you know, whatever. But our argument was that just missing a deadline in a statute cannot cause the city to waive attorney-client privilege. So therefore, we can't be forced to turn over these documents. Well, the AG for years and years and years said, too bad, it's all waived, turn it all over. Well, it got litigated, and Texas court said, no, AG, you don't waive attorney-client privilege for missing a statutory deadline. But we don't want to miss any deadlines. Next question. Here are common exceptions. Confidential by law, Social Security numbers, certain personnel information. You know, if we get a request for utility records, people's account numbers, people's, you know, checking, whatever, those kinds of things. If it's related to litigation, related to competition or bidding, legal matters, attorney-client, certain law enforcement records. I was involved in litigation, chief, over certain law enforcement records. I'm going to forget the name. There's an acronym that you guys have on your machines that give out information for crimes in progress. It's your computer. I can't remember what it's called. Who? Yeah, well, it's kind of like that. It was kind of CAD. It was something, I don't remember. Anyway, whatever. I can't remember the acronym. But the point is that we had litigation over that. And if it is related to the investigation of a crime that has not been
Ongoing
finally
An
investigation.
resolved.
ongoing investigation.
Yeah.
Ongoing investigation.
Right, if it relates to investigation of an ongoing crime, and it's not just like a name or an address or something like that, but it's, you know, suspect, 6'2", tattoo, or whatever, that's related to the investigation of an ongoing crime, that can be withheld. We had to go to court over that with the AG, because a requester said it all needed to be turned over, and we said, no, that stuff is related to the investigation of an ongoing crime, and we won. Okay? I don't know how many trade secrets y'all have, but, you know, if you have a trade secret, that's confidential. Next slide. Again, some of these that might come up, I mean, certain employee information, that comes up a lot. Credit card, debit card, device numbers, that comes up a lot. Private email addresses that people put on an application they fill with the city or something like that, that comes up a lot. Social security numbers, that comes up a lot. Next. So these are not accepted from required disclosure unless made confidential by some law. Okay, so these are public information not accepted. Completed reports. Draft reports are not public information. Completed reports related to an audit, evaluation, or investigation can be. Now, certain investigations are still not public because if it's an investigation that I perform as an attorney, is for attorney-client purposes, then that's attorney-client privileged, okay? So if you guys ever ask, and this has come up again in litigation that I just had, where the plaintiff wanted an attorney investigation into workplace sexual harassment, right? So they do workplace sexual harassment investigation, and the attorney's conclusions we could withhold. Factual information, certain factual information we have to turn over. So it becomes very, like these pages yes, those pages no. It just, you know, gets pretty specific. But name, sex, ethnicity, salary, title, dates of employment, okay to turn over. Information in an account, voucher, or contract relating to the receipt or expenditure of public funds, turn it over. If it deals with public funds, it's almost, I mean, it's gonna be public information, right? The only time it's not public information, if it relates to the expenditure of public funds, is if you're still in that negotiating economic development status, right? You don't have to turn over those drafts and do the contract that you're still negotiating and, you know, whatever. But once it becomes an expenditure, an approved thing, turn it over. Working papers used to estimate the need for expenditure of public funds, or upon the completion of an estimate, once it's completed documents. Next page. I hear steps now, and I'm like, oh. Okay. There's this other category of information called super public information. I mean, name of each official and the final record of voting, administrative staff manuals and instructions to staff that affect the public, information contained in public court records, settlement agreements to which a governmental body is a party. Those always get turned over, they never get withheld, and we can't even ask for an AG opinion on those. If it's super public, you just turn it over. Now, we gotta make sure that it actually fits that category, but, you know.
Okay.
All right, next slide. So there's some things that we can redact without getting a ruling. And again, you gotta read these to, you know, specifically and make sure you have it in front of you. And we will do that, you know, in conjunction with you. But I mean, the big one is like credit card, debit card, personal information of certain public employees, you know, certain motor vehicle records, that kind of stuff. Certain information related to police officers. There's also another one that gets, you know, can get automatically redacted. Next. So AG issues a ruling. I said 60 days. It's 45, extended up to 55. Shows you what I know. You have to provide a copy to the requester, and we can go look them up on the AG's webpage. Next page. So there's litigation, and I've been involved in a lot of litigation over this, can be related to the TPIA. So the district attorney or the county attorney can bring actions if for violations, and those actions can be civil or criminal. Okay, depending upon the specifics. They have to. There are certain deadlines in there by which they have to act. Okay, but I mean, just understand that there are both civil and criminal penalties for these violations. And so, that's why it's important for any time anything that seems like it might be a public information request comes in, that we get it so that we can ascertain what it is and what steps we need to take. Because I've had this situation occur before where we got correspondence, and we, the attorneys, we couldn't discern that it was actually asking for public information. And then we get a letter from the AG going, "We've received a complaint about you." For what? This letter. Well, they didn't ask for anything. Well, we think they did. Okay. So, it's err on the side of caution, And, but because those deadlines are so important, we need to be sure that we see it as soon as possible, All right, next. Writ of mandamus. I mean, that's by the time that you get to this point, you're in somebody's in a court and somebody's asking a judge to order the city to turn something over that should have been turned over. That's what that is, okay? By the time you get to that point, we have, we're involved, we know what's going on, usually, but again, deadline. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, okay? Next slide. Criminal penalties, again, this one also has criminal penalties. If you fail or refuse to give access, it's official misconduct, and you can go to jail. Next. Now, there are defenses, and one of the defenses that everyone likes is this one here, that you reasonably relied on the written instruction of the Officer of Public Information to not disclose records. What that means is that or someone in my office has drafted a letter for your your records information officer, your city secretary, to say, no, don't turn this over. And if I'm wrong, you get to throw me under the bus, obviously we do these with deliberation, and but yes, that's why getting your lawyer involved is really important, because we can provide a defense should things really go sideways. If we've told you, no, you don't have to turn this over, then that's a defense to prosecution, okay? And then we can file petitions for declaratory judgment. The AG says, turn this over. And you go, heck no, we're not turning that over. That's not a public record. I've litigated that too, where we file a lawsuit challenging the AG in court over whether or not it's a public record. Done a lot of that too. Hopefully you all don't have to worry about it, but it happens. Next slide. Destruction, removal, or alteration of public information. We talked about this at the outset. That's why anything y'all keep and maintain on your personal devices, if you destroy it, remove it, or alter it, then that's a violation. So don't do it. Because that's your criminal liability right there. Okay? That's not just for the city, that's for you personally. Okay? Next slide. Distribution or misuse of confidential information. official misconduct, okay, which can be grounds for removal from office. If you distribute information that's considered confidential under the TPIA, that can get you not only criminally liable, but it can be official misconduct. Okay? I don't expect any of that to happen, but you know, you've been warned. Next slide. Now, costs generally. Sometimes cities get repeat requesters. What do you do with these repeat requesters? The TPIA has provisions so that you can pass some of those costs on to them for repeat requesters. And you have to go through the process, you have to pass an ordinance, and you have to do all of these things, right? But if you do that, then theoretically you can pass some of those costs on to repeat requesters who use the TPIA as, as a means to inflict just cost on the city. And I've dealt with some of that before. It's a hassle. You've got to balance the public's right to information with the cost to the taxpayers. And that's what the purpose of these sections are. Next slide. So here are AG links to the AG's website. And then here is a message board. Here's what a message board looks like. If you want a message board, as you can see, nowhere does it say Facebook. So don't, I'm not a Facebook fan, okay? That'll get you in trouble. Is that it? Next slide? Okay. I only went 12 minutes over, okay?
Well, it's not over yet. I got
Okay, all right. Well, it's on you, all right.
Okay. As far as having our attorney present in a meeting, can anybody up here request you to be here without going through Kent?
That's an internal policy decision
Okay.
that's not governed by the TPIA
That's A.
so you can, if you want to pass an ordinance or you want to set some policy, you can do that.
Okay. All right. That's A. We, not this administrator, but other administrators, okay, had hissy fits. Like if there's an agenda going on and a council member or me, per se, has a question and we're not for sure it's a legal question or if we could get in trouble, can we pull you to the side and ask you this question?
Yes, you can contact me
Good.
directly.
All right,
You-
'cause
so-
we were told we couldn't.
So now, here's what I recommend though. What I recommend is that it is perfectly, because I represent the city, you all ought to have my email address.
Yes.
And any of you can email me, and I'm happy to answer whatever
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
However, just the decision that y'all need to make is that some cities enact policies so that all of those questions they go to a city administrator or city manager, and then they come to me for cost-saving purposes. Because if I'm getting 6 different emails from 6 different people about the same
That's 6
question,
different costs?
then that's 6 different emails I'm responding to, and people go, well, I don't want to see your bills. Well, okay, I can't not answer my client. You know what I mean? So it puts me, I'm going to answer whoever emails me, I'm going to answer the question unless there is an official policy in place that it only comes from Kent or it only comes from the mayor or whatever.
Okay.
Okay? So that's up to y'all how you want to handle it,
Okay.
but you can enact a policy that works for you.
Just wanted to
Yes,
clarify
ma'am.
that.
But y'all can contact me, and I have historically, I think it's important for the council to have that contact with the attorney, and I think it's valuable. But it also, when it's really hot button topics or it's something that's very complex. If your question requires me to write an hour-long memo to answer your one question, that's 1 hour of work that the city's paying for. And then if you send, so again, it's a cost thing, it's something you gotta balance, but you make that decision about how to deal with it.
Okay.
But we'll do whatever y'all want.
Okay.
Who else had a question? Yes,
I
sir.
had actually two questions. One is, the city can charge reasonable costs for reproduction?
It can charge the costs that are set forth in the act. They are statutorily set, you can't alter them. And I
Okay,
don't
so-
remember what they are off the top of my head, but they're in the,
Okay,
TPIA.
so there's a statute that
Yes,
says
sir.
we can charge 10 cents a copy and, you know,
What-
whatever for
Yes, sir.
someone to make those copies
Correct.
for you. Because the alternative would be that they would come and bring a copy service.
they can, yeah, and so that's a good, and that's happened, I've dealt with that before too, where people have come in, where people have said, okay, we don't wanna pay your costs, but we're bringing a copy service, and excuse us, we're just gonna take over your administrative offices. Now,
No.
that they don't get to do. So they're, you know, it gets kind of complex about how you handle those things, but they don't get to just come in and do whatever they want. You need to make reasonable accommodations to allow them to look during business hours. You gotta give them, you can't, if you had a boiler room,
Yeah,
you know, bang, or you can't turn up the feedback.
Yeah.
You know, like, that'd be great, but you can't do that.
right.
Right.
Okay? So you gotta give them a reasonable opportunity to look at it, but they don't get to set the rules. You set the rules, they
set
just
the
have to be reasonable.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you. Oh, he
The
had
other
two
thing
parts
is
here,
when they
yeah.
request records, an example would be, we have drawings for the city for, the water system.
Yep.
Well, the contract with the company says they own the drawings.
Mm-hmm,
They've given us a copy of that.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so they come in and they ask for that. Should we then, because actually the real source of that document is the engineer, not the city.
Well, remember, if it is a document that is maintained by the city, it's a public record. I don't care what that contract
Yeah.
says, it
Okay.
becomes a public record
We
if
own
the
it, they can
city
have it.
maintains it. However, you said water lines and that kind of stuff.
Right.
One of the exceptions in the TPIA, which wasn't on this wonderful slide, is critical infrastructure. That is one of the exceptions to turning stuff over. Now, you know, that becomes very technical about what constitutes critical infrastructure and what doesn't constitute critical infrastructure. However, if it constitutes critical infrastructure, that is an exception to public records. They don't get the state secrets. You don't have to turn over that stuff to them if it meets the criteria of what constitutes critical infrastructure. And that was all following 9/11, Patriot Act, protection of you know, critical infrastructure.
Right.
And it's become more important. I don't know if you all followed the news, but there have been kind of these individualized attacks on energy distribution systems
Right.
in states. And so that has raised this issue again because it's caused entire towns to lose power. And so if individuals come in and asking you for, you know, what, hey, can I have all of the location of all of these, location of your tanks or what, you know, whatever, that's something we're gonna have to look at real closely because those types of requests very well could be critical infrastructure. And even if we're unsure, that's one of those where we'd wanna ask the AG and have them tell us,
Very true.
probably.
Okay. All right,
Yes, sir.
anybody else? Oh, Mr. Wiggins?
So, one other thing is, can the mayor, let's say we have some subject that's gonna be on the agenda, doesn't matter what, and maybe we're gonna take a vote. Can the mayor, prior to the meeting, call individual council members and say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think?
I would not recommend that.
No.
I would,
Or the city administrator, with the women there.
I would not recommend that either. There is a there's a case out of the city of San Antonio where the city of San Antonio's city manager had a practice of having meetings with individual council members prior to meetings so that he could ascertain how you're gonna vote.
Right.
And citizens said, this looks kind of hinky to me, and the courts agreed as a rolling quorum kind of thing. And it was a no-no. So not a good idea.
Anybody else?
Anything from the staff, citizens, questions out there as well?
A citizen, okay. Mr. McLean?
Can I ask a few?
Yes, sir, sure
Okay.
can.
Yes, in the beginning, when you were talking about the Texas Open Meetings Act, you were talking about citizens speaking.
Mhm.
Are they allowed to, if it's professional, criticize the city, criticize, basically tell the city or the council something that they don't like? Now, provided it's done in a professional manner.
The short answer is yes. Right? I mean, certainly, one of the excellent benefits that you as elected officials get is to hear from people, from your citizens when they're unhappy,
Yes.
right? And so, yes, as long as the comments come within the context of the rules that are set up, which is, you got your 3 minutes, they have to occur at the beginning of the meeting, and you can't do it in a disorderly way. You can't use epithets or slurs or, whatever it is. Then yes, absolutely. I don't like the way that you did ex-mayor. Sorry, Mayor, that's the benefit you
I
get.
let everybody pick on me, that's fine. I pick on me a
Yes,
lot.
so yes.
Get another one, but first I want to compliment them, because I have had requested public information before, and they've been very, very good about it. A great bunch of people. My next question is, okay, so this is put on YouTube,
Mhm.
and from time to time, somebody might make a comment. Once they make a comment, again, providing it's professional, can that comment be removed by the city?
So I don't know what your YouTube page looks like or what the comment looks like. I'm not,
Comment?
is
Just
it-
a message board for
it's a
people
message?
that are viewing can comment on what's happening or what questions for it.
Can you give an instance, per se, just,
Say
instance?
there's,
Excuse me.
yes ma'am, so you bring something up, a particular topic. I work offshore. A lot of times I'll watch you guys offshore. And I wanna make a comment about a particular agenda item.
Okay.
Oh, I don't agree with this, or what about this, or just, a comment, maybe not getting a response, but just leaving how I feel about a certain thing
Sure.
or subject.
Okay.
Are they allowed to, does that comment have to stay, or can they remove that?
So,
If they, for whatever reason, I'm just.
sure. As a general proposition, my advice to the city would be to not remove comments. Again, unless they are disorderly or they raise a safety concern or something like that, or they disclose private information, as long as there's not some other issue with it, then I think as a general proposition, those be my recommendation that those comments stay up if it is a city moderated page.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that you may want to look at is in more depth is your social media policy, because that is a rapidly evolving area of the law, and we can't really delve into that tonight because we're not noticed for that tonight, and I don't want to violate the Open Meetings Act tonight by getting too far into an item that we're not noticed for. However, that is something for future reference to think about.
We're working on it.
Yes, sir.
We're working on it. Yes, Danielle?
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question on the destruction, removal, occupation slide.
Mhm.
Is there a retention period?
Yes, there is. So your retention period for certified agendas is 2 years. Your retention period for everything else is if the city does not already have an ordinance following the state's general retention policy, you should adopt that and follow the state's general retention policy. But off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you how long that is. But whatever the state library's retention policy is, if you don't have that, you should adopt it.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I use Facebook a lot,
You do?
yes.
Okay.
And citizens get hold of me on Facebook a lot, and they ask questions,
Okay.
and I answer anything that we're talking about right here at this board. Is that bad of me, or?
It's not, I don't think less of you, but, no, I'm sorry, I'm just playing around. Okay, so is that your personal Facebook page?
Yes.
Okay, you as a citizen and as a user of Facebook, you can use your Facebook page within the terms, whatever the terms of service are that Facebook allows, okay? And the city doesn't really have any say over that unless you went on your Facebook page and you disclosed confidential information in the city. Right, right. That you couldn't do, and then the city could do something about it, you know? But your personal Facebook page, and that's why, it's not that the problem with Facebook is that when you are on Facebook as private citizen, when you're on Facebook as a private citizen, you are operating under Facebook's terms of service, not the Open Meetings Act, not the Public Information Act, not any city of Bruceville-Eddy, or, you're operating under their terms of service. So as long as you're not violating, you can do whatever you want within their terms of service and say whatever you want. Those are more political considerations than legal considerations, usually, unless you do something that's, again, like a disclosure of confidential information or something like that. Or three of you get together on your Facebook page and decide, well, we're going to implement this policy for the city. Please don't do that. But, yeah.
Now, isn't there a difference, talking about that Facebook page, isn't there a difference between your personal page and say fence post?
Yeah.
Well, fence post,
Yeah, I answer
fence
something
post
on
is
Facebook.
just it's
Fence
a,
post is
it's
also
still
personal.
open. That's
a
still
group.
public.
That's a local
It's
group.
a group on Facebook, so it'd be like, the classic car group,
Okay.
essentially, but Facebook, or fence post is for
It's a
the
community
community.
page.
And
Okay.
so everybody talks about community issues.
But
I have eggs to sell, or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
But is that different from your personal Facebook?
Well, if it's a Facebook page,
You
it's
have to be
still
invited.
operated pursuant to Facebook's terms of service. However, if you and you and you and you all go on Fence Post,
Mm-hmm.
if you all go on Fence Post, and one of you starts a thread that says, I think the policy of Bruceville-Eddy should be X.
Oh.
And then you go, you know what, I think it should be Y. You respond. And then you go, no, it's gotta be Z. That's where,
There's an open meeting.
that's where you could get into trouble. So, I mean, it's up to you all to be very careful about how you use it and not confer with each other on it.
Just answering questions to the citizens.
Answering questions to the citizens, I think, is fine. Because it's no different, there's really no difference between that and when I send an angry email, off to, John Cornyn, and John Cornyn's office writes back to me and goes, no, you idiot, you're wrong because of X, Y. You can converse with your constituents how you want to converse with them, but you can't all do it.
Yeah. keep
Or
it
not
moving.
doing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're elected officials, and you could, if I get a TPIA request, or Kent gets a TPIA request, that says, give me all of Ricky Wiggins' Facebook or Fence Post or whatever posts that relating to the city of Bruceville-Eddy, you're gonna have to go track them all down and turn them over.
Ms. Pam has a question.
Yes.
Here recent, there's been a lot of people going on Facebook or Fence Post and dogging the community. And is that something that they should not respond to?
you're grown-ups, and I can't, my job is to tell you, this is what's as best I can. This is what's legal, this is what the law requires, and this is where it's a gray area, this is where definitely don't do this, okay? That's what I can do. The way in which you communicate with your constituents, you have a lot of discretion about how you do that, and what you say and what you don't say. And most of what you're talking about has more of a political ramification than a
Yes.
legal ramification,
Yes.
frankly. Again, what I'm concerned about is when if you guys start to do it together, in the same, responding to each other, in a post, in a thread, that's where it becomes problematic. But any individualized contact you have with your constituents, if you want to tell your constituents to go jump in a lake, that's not a legal, that's not against the law, right? It may be politically unwise, or maybe it's politically popular. Who knows nowadays? but that's your call.
Yeah.
So-
I don't discuss anything but answer questions.
Sure.
If somebody asks me a question, I'll answer it.
Sure.
But I don't go on there and say, hey, what do y'all think about us doing,
Again, it's
Action, that's
what if
action,
you're at the
that's
coffee
right.
shop, right? I mean, if you go to the coffee shop and you have 4 different constituents come up to you and 2 of them go, man, I like what you're doing, I don't like this, and you get into a conversation with them, fundamentally it's no different. Okay, it's just that there's a written record of it.
Yeah.
But if 2 more of you come over to that coffee shop and all of you are having that conversation with these constituents, that's when I get involved, because that's when you're getting in trouble. But what you say, again, unless you're disclosing confidential information, I've got no control over what you say. It may open up the city, if it's unwise or not circumspect, it may open up the city to litigation, to exposure, to all kinds of things. But as a general proposition, again, here's the bottom line. Let me put it this way. If you know that there is an issue that you are being asked to talk about, and you think there's a good chance that we're going to go back in that room and talk about it in executive session, my advice to you is don't talk about it. That's my advice to you. Even in advance, you know what is going to get us back there. It's going to be contract disputes, it's going to be money disputes, it's going to be personnel issues, it's going to be whatever. And if it's something like that, and we might be talking about it back there, I recommend you be circumspect.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? If not,
Most of everything you see on Facebook, of course, is fact. And so I see a lot of these facts come out.
jeez.
And a lot of times what I'll do is, in response, is I'll come up and I'll say, you may want to look at this particular law. I mean, there are people out there who didn't go to law school, who seem to know a lot more than I do about the law. And I try to take, and I'm not going to tell them right or wrong, I'm just saying, please look at this, because this is the law. And in many cases, I'll take and quote it and send it to them. But there are other times when they'll ask me something, and I'll refer them to the city or
The
something
city,
like this.
have them
I
refer
try
to the
really
city
stay
on
out of
anything.
the argument part. Sure. 'Cause especially when they start to argue, it's time to leave the conversation.
Yes, it's sickening.
So,
All right.
I'm with you.
Mr. Bass,
Is that it?
is that it?
In other words, shut up, bull.
No? All
now
right.
that's something you
I
want to
have a
tell a
motion.
lawyer.
Okay, Mr. Bass, makes a motion that we resign. Close this meeting. Do I have a second? Okay, Mr. McGruer. Okay, it is now 7:35 and this meeting is closed.
Thank you, you did a wonderful job.
Thank you very, very much, sir. We appreciate you. And I'm not all that bad, I just use myself a lot.